Welcome, my friends, and let me tell you a heartwarming story of perseverance, justice, and the power of family ties. In a bustling city where dreams are made, one woman's journey to uncover the truth brings not only redemption but also the promise of a brighter future. Sit back and enjoy the story.
Emily Carter awoke to the sound of her phone buzzing insistently on the nightstand. She groggily reached over, rubbing her eyes as she glanced at the screen. It was her mother, Lisa. A sense of dread settled in the pit of her stomach as she answered the call. "Mom, is everything okay?" Emily asked, her voice thick with sleep. There was a brief pause on the other end before Lisa's voice, shaky and full of sorrow, came through. "Emily, sweetheart, I have some bad news. It's about your Uncle Jack." Emily sat up in bed, her heart pounding. "What happened? Is he all right?" Lisa took a deep breath. "Your uncle passed away last night. It was sudden, a heart attack. I'm so sorry, honey." The words hit Emily like a freight train. Uncle Jack, the man who had been like a second father to her, was gone. She had just spoken to him a few weeks ago, his laughter echoing in her ears as they reminisced about her childhood. Now he was gone, just like that. Tears welled up in her eyes as she tried to process the news. I can't believe it," Emily whispered, her voice breaking. "He was fine when I saw him last." "I know, sweetie," Lisa said gently. "He didn't want to worry you, but he had been having some health issues lately. He was so proud of you, you know. He talked about you all the time." Emily clutched the phone tightly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I should have been there more," she said, guilt gnawing at her. "I should have known." "There's no way you could have known," Lisa reassured her. "He wouldn't have wanted you to worry. But there's something else you need to know, something he kept from everyone." Emily's heart sank further. "What is it?" "He left you something in his will," Lisa said, her voice taking on a serious tone. "His restaurant, Carter's Place. He wanted you to have it." Emily's mind reeled. Carter's Place was a beloved family restaurant in the heart of the city, a place she had spent countless hours in as a child, watching her uncle cook and charm his customers. But she hadn't set foot in it for years, not since she moved away to pursue her career in marketing. I don't know what to say," Emily stammered. "I'm not a chef, Mom. I don't know how to run a restaurant." "I know it's a lot to take in," Lisa said softly. "But your uncle believed in you. He knew you could figure it out. There's something else. The restaurant has been struggling lately. Jack didn't want to burden anyone with it, but it's in pretty bad shape." Emily's head spun with the information. Uncle Jack had always been so proud, never asking for help even when he needed it. And now he was gone, leaving her with a responsibility she wasn't sure she could handle. "I need to go there," Emily said after a long pause. "I need to see it for myself." "Take your time, honey," Lisa said. "But just remember, you're not alone. We'll figure this out together." Emily nodded, even though her mother couldn't see her. "Thanks, Mom. I'll call you later." After hanging up, Emily sat in silence. The weight of her uncle's death and the inheritance pressing down on her. She had never imagined she would be in this position. And yet, here she was, faced with a decision that could change her life. A week later, Emily found herself standing in front of Carter's Place, the familiar brick facade bringing back a flood of memories. The restaurant looked the same from the outside, but there was a subtle air of neglect that hadn't been there before. The windows were slightly smudged, and the once vibrant sign above the door had faded with time. Taking a deep breath, Emily pushed open the door and stepped inside. The scent of garlic and herbs greeted her, but it was tinged with something else, something stale and unpleasant. The dining area was empty, save for a few scattered tables, and the air felt heavy with unspoken troubles. A middle-aged man in a worn chef's apron appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a rag. His face lit up with a forced smile as he saw Emily. "Can I help you?" he asked, though there was a hint of suspicion in his voice. Emily hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I'm Emily. My uncle, Jack Carter, was my uncle." The man's expression softened immediately. "Emily, of course. I'm Greg, the head chef here. Your uncle talked about you all the time. I'm so sorry for your loss." "Thank you," Emily said quietly. "I'm here to see the restaurant. My mom said it's been having some problems." Greg's face darkened. "It's true. Business hasn't been good for a while now. Jack was trying to keep it afloat. But, well, it's been tough." Emily nodded, feeling a pang of guilt for not knowing sooner. Can you show me around? I want to see what we're dealing with. Sure thing, Greg said, leading her through the dining area and into the kitchen. The kitchen was a far cry from the bustling, spotless space Emily remembered from her childhood. The counters were cluttered with dirty dishes, and the equipment looked worn and in desperate need of maintenance. The staff, though few in number, worked in silence, their faces etched with fatigue. We've had to cut corners just to keep the lights on, Greg explained as they walked through the kitchen. The suppliers are demanding payment, and we've had to resort to cheaper ingredients just to get by. But that's not the worst of it. Emily's stomach tightened. What do you mean? Greg sighed and lowered his voice. There's been some shady activity going on. Late-night deliveries, missing inventory. I've tried to talk to the manager about it, but he just brushes me off. Who's the manager? Emily asked, her concern growing. His name's Tony, Greg said with a frown. He's been with the restaurant for a couple of years now. Jack trusted him, but ever since Jack got sick, things have gone downhill fast. I've had my suspicions, but without proof. Emily's mind raced. If something illegal happened at Carter's place, she needed to find out. Her uncle's legacy was at stake, and she couldn't let it be tarnished by corruption. Thanks for telling me, Greg, Emily said, trying to keep her voice steady. I need to talk to Tony. Good luck, Greg muttered. He's not an easy man to deal with. Emily left the kitchen and went to the manager's office, her heart pounding in her chest. She knocked on the door and waited, trying to steady her nerves. Come in, a gruff voice called from inside. Emily pushed the door open and stepped into the small, cluttered office. Tony, a stocky man with a receding hairline, sat behind the desk, his eyes narrowing as he looked up at her. Who are you? He demanded. My name is Emily Carter, she said, her voice firm. I'm Jack Carter's niece. Tony's expression flickered with surprise before he quickly masked it. I see. And what brings you here, Miss Carter? I'm here to take a look at the restaurant, Emily replied. I've been told there have been some problems lately, and I want to know what's going on. Tony leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. There's nothing to worry about, just a few financial hiccups. Your uncle's health was declining, and he wasn't able to manage things as well as he used to. But I've got everything under control. Emily wasn't convinced. There was something in Tony's tone, something evasive that set off alarm bells in her head. I'd like to see the books, she said, keeping her gaze steady on him. Tony's eyes narrowed further. Why? I've been managing this place just fine. Because it's my uncle's restaurant, Emily said, her voice tinged with an edge. And now it's my responsibility to make sure it's run properly. If you're doing everything by the book, then there shouldn't be a problem, right? Tony stared at her for a long moment, the tension in the room palpable. Finally, he shrugged, a smirk playing on his lips. Fine, he said, pulling out a ledger from the drawer and handing it to her. Knock yourself out. Emily took the ledger and began flipping through it, her eyes scanning the numbers. At first glance, everything seemed in order, but as she dug deeper, she started to notice discrepancies. Large sums of money unaccounted for, invoices that didn't match up with the inventory, and payments to suppliers she didn't recognize. What are these payments for? Emily asked, pointing to one of the questionable entries. Tony glanced at the ledger and shrugged. Just routine expenses, nothing you need to worry about. Emily wasn't buying it. She closed the ledger and handed it back to him. I'm going to have an accountant look at these. If there's nothing wrong, then there shouldn't be an issue, right? Tony's smirk faltered for a brief second before he regained his composure. Do what you want. But don't go sticking your nose where it doesn't belong, Miss Carter. This place is barely holding on as it is. Emily felt a chill run down her spine at the thinly veiled threat, but she refused to back down. I'll be the judge of that, she said, her voice steady. She left the office, her mind racing with possibilities. Something was definitely wrong, and she was determined to get to the bottom of it. Her uncle's restaurant meant too much to her and her family to let it fall into the wrong hands. As she walked back into the dining area, she spotted Greg talking to one of the waitresses. He looked up as she approached, concern etched on his face. How did it go? He asked. Not great, Emily admitted. There's definitely something shady going on. I'm going to need your help, Greg. I need to find out what Tony's up to. Greg nodded, his expression serious. Whatever you need, I'm here for you. Thanks, Emily said, grateful for his support. I'm going to start by having an accountant go over the books. In the meantime, keep an eye on anything unusual, especially those late-night deliveries. Will do, Greg said. And Emily, be careful. Tony's not someone you want to mess with. I will, Emily promised, though she knew she was already in deep. Over the next few days, Emily threw herself into the task of uncovering the truth. She met with the accountant who confirmed her suspicions. There were significant discrepancies in the restaurant's finances. Large sums of money were missing, and several payments had been made to shell companies that didn't seem to exist. But the most alarming discovery came when Greg informed her of a new delivery that had arrived late at night. He had managed to catch a glimpse of the truck, and it wasn't from any of their usual suppliers. We need to see what's in those deliveries, Emily said, her mind racing. If we can catch Tony in the act, we'll have proof. Greg nodded. I'll keep watch tonight. If they make another delivery, I'll let you know. That night, Emily barely slept, her mind consumed with thoughts of the restaurant and the danger she might be walking into. She knew she was treading on thin ice, but she couldn't let her uncle's legacy be destroyed by corruption. Around midnight, her phone buzzed with a text from Greg. They're here. Emily jumped out of bed, quickly pulling on her clothes and grabbing her car keys. She drove to the restaurant, her heart pounding in her chest. When she arrived, she found Greg waiting for her outside, his face tense with anticipation. They're in the alley, Greg whispered as she approached. They're unloading something from the truck. Emily nodded, taking a deep breath to steady herself. Let's go. They crept around the side of the building, staying in the shadows as they made their way to the alley. Sure enough, there was a truck parked there, its back doors open as two men unloaded crates. Tony stood nearby, watching them with a cold, calculating expression. Those crates, Emily whispered to Greg. They look just like the ones in the kitchen storage. Greg nodded. I thought the same thing. Emily pulled out her phone and started recording, capturing the scene as the men unloaded the crates and carried them into the restaurant. She zoomed in on Tony's face, catching the smirk that played on his lips as he watched them work. We need to get inside, Emily whispered. We need to see what's in those crates. Greg nodded, leading the way back to the front of the restaurant. They slipped inside through the back door, careful to avoid making any noise. The restaurant was dark and silent, the only light coming from the alley where the men were working. Emily's heart raced as they made their way to the kitchen storage area. The crates were stacked against the wall, just as they had been in the video. She approached them cautiously, her hands trembling as she pried one of them open. Inside, she found bottles of expensive-looking wine, just like the ones Greg had described. But as she examined them more closely, she realized something was off. The labels were slightly crooked, the fonts mismatched. These are fakes, Emily whispered, her stomach turning. They're selling counterfeit alcohol. Greg's face darkened. I knew it. I knew something wasn't right. Emily took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. We need to call the police. We have enough evidence now. Greg nodded, pulling out his phone. But before he could dial, they heard the sound of footsteps approaching. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she turned to see Tony standing in the doorway, his face twisted with fury. What the hell do you think you're doing? Tony snarled, his eyes blazing with anger. We know what you're up to, Emily said, trying to keep her voice steady. We have proof. Counterfeit alcohol, stolen money. It's all here. Tony's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Emily saw a flash of panic in them. But then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by a cold, menacing smirk. You think you're so clever, don't you? He sneered, stepping closer. But you have no idea what you're getting yourself into. Emily's heart raced as she stood her ground, refusing to back down. We're calling the police, Tony? This ends tonight. But before she could react, Tony lunged at her, his hand reaching for her phone. Emily stumbled back, but Greg was there in an instant, grabbing Tony's arm and pulling him away from her. Get out of here, Emily! Greg shouted, struggling to hold Tony back. Call the cops! Emily didn't need to be told twice. She turned and ran, her heart pounding in her chest as she fled the restaurant. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911, her hands shaking as she relayed the situation to the operator. Please hurry, she begged. He's dangerous. The minutes that followed felt like an eternity, but finally she heard the sound of sirens in the distance. The police arrived, swarming the restaurant and apprehending Tony before he could do any more harm. Greg emerged from the building, looking battered but relieved, as the officers led Tony away in handcuffs. You okay? Emily asked, rushing to his side. Greg nodded, wincing slightly as he rubbed his shoulder. I'm fine, just a bit bruised, but it's nothing serious. Emily let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding, her heart slowly returning to a normal pace. I'm so sorry you got dragged into this. I never imagined it would get this dangerous. Greg gave her a small, reassuring smile. It's not your fault, Emily. You did what you had to do to protect your uncle's legacy. Jack would be proud of you. The words hit Emily hard, filling her with a mix of emotions. Relief that they had caught Tony, sorrow for her uncle's passing, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility for the future of Carter's Place. The police officers soon approached them, one of them speaking in a calm, authoritative tone. We've arrested Tony and confiscated the counterfeit goods. We'll need statements from both of you, and we'll be in touch as the investigation progresses. Emily nodded, her mind still reeling from everything that had happened. Of course, thank you. As the police wrapped up their investigation, Emily and Greg were left standing in front of the restaurant, the night air cool and still around them. The reality of the situation was starting to sink in. Carter's Place had been saved, but the road ahead was still uncertain. Do you think the staff will stay? Emily asked quietly, glancing at the darkened windows of the restaurant. Greg considered her question for a moment before replying. I think they will. They've been through a lot, but they cared about Jack, and they want to see this place succeed. If you show them that you're committed to turning things around, they'll stand by you. Emily felt a surge of determination. I'm going to do everything I can to make this place what it was meant to be, for Uncle Jack and for everyone who believed in him. Greg smiled, his expression filled with admiration. I know you will, and I'll be here to help every step of the way. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Emily worked tirelessly to clean up the mess Tony had left behind, both literally and figuratively. She met with the accountant again, going over every detail of the restaurant's finances, making sure that everything was in order. She contacted suppliers, assuring them that the debts would be paid and that Carter's Place would be returning to its former standards. But perhaps the most important step was talking to the staff. Emily called a meeting, gathering everyone in the dining area to address them directly. As she stood before them, she felt a knot of anxiety in her stomach. These were the people who had worked under her uncle, who had seen the restaurant at its best and its worst. She needed their support if she was going to turn things around. Thank you all for coming, Emily began, her voice steady despite her nerves. I know these last few months have been difficult. My Uncle Jack meant the world to me, and I know he meant a lot to all of you too. When he passed, I had no idea what kind of situation I was walking into. But now that I'm here, I'm committed to making things right. She paused, gauging the reactions of the staff. They were listening intently, their faces a mix of hope and uncertainty. I won't lie to you, she continued. There's a lot of work to be done. We need to rebuild our reputation, regain the trust of our customers, and make sure that everything we do is above board. But I believe in this restaurant, and I believe in the people who work here. Together we can turn this place around. There was a moment of silence, and then one of the waitresses, a young woman named Sarah, spoke up. We're with you, Emily. Jack was like family to us, and we want to see this place succeed just as much as you do. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, and Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her. The staff was on her side. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. That means more to me than you know. Let's make Carter's Place the restaurant my uncle always dreamed it could be. The weeks turned into months, and slowly but surely, Carter's Place began to change. Emily poured her heart and soul into the restaurant, working alongside the staff to improve every aspect of the business. She upgraded the kitchen equipment, brought in fresh, high-quality ingredients, and revamped the menu with some of her uncle's classic dishes, along with a few new creations of her own. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but little by little, the restaurant began to draw in more customers. Word spread about the changes, and soon the tables that had once sat empty were filled with patrons eager to experience the revitalized Carter's Place. One evening, as Emily was finishing up in the kitchen, she looked out into the dining area and saw it bustling with activity. The sound of laughter and conversation filled the air, and she couldn't help but smile. This was what her uncle had always wanted, a place where people could come together, enjoy good food, and feel like they were part of something special. As she stepped out of the kitchen, Greg approached her, wiping his hands on a towel. You did it, Emily. Look at this place. It's alive again. Emily nodded, a sense of pride swelling in her chest. We did it, Greg. I couldn't have done it without you and everyone else. Greg grinned. I think Jack would be proud of what you've accomplished. Emily's eyes misted over at the mention of her uncle. I hope so. He was the heart of this place. I just want to do right by him. You're doing more than that, Greg said. You're making it your own, and that's exactly what he would have wanted. As the night wore on, Emily found herself standing on the patio, the cool evening breeze ruffling her hair. The city lights twinkled in the distance, and she felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. It had been a long, difficult journey, but she had come out on the other side stronger and more determined than ever. Just then, the door to the patio opened, and Greg stepped out, a bottle of wine in hand. Thought you could use a drink, he said, holding up the bottle. Emily chuckled. Thanks, but I think I've had enough excitement for one night. Greg smiled and joined her, pouring a glass for each of them. To Carter's place, he said, raising his glass. And to you, Emily, for saving it. Emily clinked her glass against his, a smile playing on her lips. To Carter's place, she echoed. And to new beginnings. They stood there in comfortable silence, sipping their wine and taking in the view. Emily felt a warmth in her heart, knowing that she had done something important, not just for her uncle, but for herself as well. As the night drew to a close, Greg turned to her, a thoughtful expression on his face. Emily, I think you've found your true calling. Running this place, bringing people together, it suits you. Emily considered his words, a small smile tugging at her lips. Maybe you're right. I never thought I'd end up here, but now that I am, I can't imagine doing anything else. Greg's gaze softened, and he reached out to take her hand. Whatever happens, you know I'll be here, right? We're in this together. Emily looked into his eyes, feeling a connection she hadn't expected. I know, she said softly, and I'm glad. As they stood there, hand in hand, Emily felt a sense of contentment settle over her. The future was uncertain, but she wasn't afraid. With Greg by her side and the support of the staff, she knew she could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Carter's Place was more than just a restaurant. It was a testament to the power of family, the strength of community, and the resilience of the human spirit. And as long as she had those things, Emily knew she could overcome anything. As the city skyline glittered before them, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with promise, adventure, and maybe even a little romance, and she couldn't wait to see what it would bring.